evening, subscribers. Welcome to an OCC update today, the 25th of March 2017. My name's Chris Nitzo. This update is sponsored by a major sponsor, Campbell Scientific Australia, when measurements matter. Folks, as you can see here, the expectation hasn't changed much in the forecast. It has perhaps moved a little bit further to the south, but we did mention that this was trending that way for quite some time beforehand. So we're just seeing that. Now, there's a few of you that might be going, well, what the hell is going on here? The cyclone's basically passing right over the top of Alva Beach, or just to the south of Townsville here, and yet Townsville's not even in a warning, whereas it's passing well to the north of Mackay, and Mackay's in a warning. Well, the reason comes down to the structure of the system, folks. So if you are south of the system, and I've been saying this now, and I've been harping on it for quite some time, if you are south of the system, the onset of gales and the onset of rainfall will far precede the onset of gales and rainfall if you are directly west or north of the system. Now, that should come as no surprise to anyone, so I'm hoping that our subscribers are paying enough attention in the last few updates to definitely understand what's going on here. I know it can be a little bit confusing, but basically all the bomb's saying is that within the next 24 hours, gales could be experienced in this section of coastline, but it might be about 24 to 48 hours before we could experience gales in this section of coastline. So that's the difference. It's a really large system at the moment, probably a lot larger, in fact, than what we were expecting in terms of its spatial spread. Now, you can see the rotation here on radar, very large indeed. It's basically creating feeder bands right up through all the way just east of Gladstone, as far south as Gladstone anyway. And you can see those feeder bands just coming up and around the system circulation. Fantastic to see just such a large area, a large mass of cloud and rain. Let's take a look at the satellite. One thing that happens when you do get these large systems, folks, is they tend to work against themselves in terms of their developmental potential, at least at the start of their life cycle. Because we've got such a large system, the circulation center tends to be quite broad, and because of that, we get a lot of convection that happens not necessarily around the system's core. Now, what you can see, though, and this is very important to notice, is just these last hour or two of images where we're starting to get some really strong convection building in and around the core circulation. So it'll be interesting to see if we're getting a little bit of lightning coming out of that overnight. And normally what tends to happen is once we start to see lightning in a developing tropical cyclone, especially in its core I'm talking about, not out here in the feeder bands, but in its core, once it begins to become lightning active, it does tend to show signs of rapid intensification in that next 6 to 12 hours. So we'll be watching this like a hawk for any lightning that starts to take place inside that core circulation element of that tropical cyclone. As I say, we're not watching for lightning out here, but we are watching for lightning in this core. On the Bureau's technical forecast here, you can see that getting down to 949 hectopascals, that's a very significant Category 4 tropical cyclone, folks. That's definitely no laughing matter, this one. Some of the modelling even taking that a step further and suggesting a Category 5. So as I say, the trend of the forecast has been a little bit further south, so you can see basically the centre passing right over the top of the air. You can see on the northern flank, Townsville still receiving destructive winds. Probably going to miss out on the very destructive core of the system, but certainly destructive winds are a good chance for Townsville. Despite the fact that we're only on watch, just understand that the reasoning behind that, and I've explained that, so I'm not going to do it again, but you can certainly see that the warning extends all the way down to St. Lawrence. Now, you might be wondering, why the hell is Cairns under a tropical cyclone watch? Now, surely if there's a cyclone here, Cairns won't experience gales, and they won't. You're right. You're 100% right. But the reason that Cairns is on a watch is because of the European model. One model and its ensemble members still have the system possibly developing here and tracking rapidly towards the west and making landfall somewhere between Innisfail and Ingham. And so the opportunity certainly does exist if that more northerly solution took place for a tropical cyclone to be producing gales all the way up to Cairns. And so that's why Cairns is still on cyclone watch. Just goes to show how much pull the European model has with the Bureau of Meteorology, and also how much pull it has with us. We love the European model, but we also need to acknowledge when it's not on task, and it has been a little bit off in the last few days with regards to this system, and not quite picking up this extra southerly motion in it. Speaking of computer models, let's start going through them. Alright, so the GFS model, you can see the system wrapping up very nicely here at the 850 hectopascal level, making landfall right on the Bowen coastline, between Bowen and Proserpine, and basically the eye passing right over the top of Bowen Township. And you can see that happens, and the GFS thankfully is starting to get back into I guess, into line with all the rest of the modelling. The GFS has been predicting a Monday morning impact on the coast, and that was never really going to be the case, at least since yesterday's modelling. So we can now see that the GFS is becoming more realistic in its interpretation of the landfalling time. So you can see around about 4 a.m. in the morning and around that Bowen coastline. You can see on the HWRF model here, it's certainly starting to ramp up in intensity across around about 7 o'clock in the morning here tomorrow, and really intensifying fairly rapidly into a Category 3 tropical cyclone now, with quite a significant wind field around it of 100 to 130 knots at the 850 hectopascal level, which equates to about anywhere between an 80 and 95 knot system at the surface. And you can see same sort of scenario here, crossing the coast right around Bowen. Now remember, the HWRF model tends to be nested inside the GFS framework, so the GFS and the HWRF model will often show fairly similar end results or outputs. The Access G model, looking at that in a bit more detail, you can see that it crosses the coast here around about Tuesday morning as well, right on the coast to the north of Townsville, just on the northern beaches of Townsville there, as a Category 2 tropical cyclone moving through fairly rapidly away to the west-southwest at that point in time. Looking at the European here, we can see a very, very sharply intensifying tropical cyclone, getting very close to Category 5 by the time it makes landfall. It makes landfall right around Townsville, and it makes landfall probably around Tuesday very early in the morning, and then continues out to the west. UK Met model shows this rapidly intensifying tropical cyclone making landfall somewhere between Ayr and Bowen on the 28th, around about the afternoon of Tuesday. Now, it is interesting to note, though, that if, as I said to you in this the lunchtime update earlier today, that if the system does take too long to hit the coast, then it's going to be all she wrote. It's going to move away to the southeast. There's a fairly significant upper level trough developing through inland Queensland through the week, and so that upper level trough will eventually track eastwards. And if the system still is offshore, say on Wednesday or more likely Thursday, then the chances are that the system just simply won't make landfall. Now, in saying that, most of the computer model guidance does pull the system onto the coast, certainly by Tuesday, and if not by Tuesday, Wednesday. So folks, tropical cyclones aren't guided by what's happening at the surface. They're guided by what's happening in the upper levels of the atmosphere. And so we've got to look at the upper levels of the atmosphere to understand what's been going on. Now let's look back at the start of the day today. So we had this upper level trough amplifying northwards into the eastern Coral Sea, and it was exerting an influence on this tropical low to try and track it away to the southeast. We also had an upper level high located here over the top of Vanuatu, and that upper level high was also producing a northwest to southeast steering mechanism. We also had a ridge in southern Queensland that was trying to establish some dominance into the southern Coral Sea, and it was fighting against the upper level trough, and it was fighting also against the high in Vanuatu. So these three systems are the three systems that govern the past and future of this tropical cyclone. Looking at tomorrow, on Monday, the expectation is, well, let's just go to tomorrow. In fact, let's not jump the gun too far. So tomorrow, what's going to happen? We've got an upper level high here. We've got an upper level high here, just lifting off a little bit to the east, and we've got the upper trough here dampening. So there's not too much happening here in the upper levels of the atmosphere. So this becomes the dominant steering mechanism. So this weakens out, lifts off a bit to the east. This dampens out to the east and south. And this now is our dominant steering mechanism. So you can see here it's adopting a west to west-northwest steer of the tropical cyclone from tomorrow. Now this is where computer models differ. Will this steer take this system west, or will this steer take this system southwest? And that's the big difference here in the computer modeling. And what's happening, what we tend to see, the larger a tropical cyclone is, the more complex the structure is, and the more complex little eddies tend to form in that circulation. Those little eddies exert a southward steer of the system south of the dominant steering pattern. So the dominant steering pattern, what that means in English is the dominant steering pattern is pulling this system in towards the west-northwest towards the coast. But because the system's so large, it creates little eddies on all around the circulation. And those little eddies actually induce a bit of a southward motion. And so the system tends to move south of the general steering flow. And so this is where the computer models now differ as to how much of a southward influence those little gyres will create in the tropical cyclone motion. So you can see here on Sunday night, this is obviously the dominant steering mechanism. Not too much going on in the upper levels. Nice little weak steering environment right in through here. So we've got a beautiful little environment here for the system to really get going. And you can certainly see there's this upper level high in through Queensland is not going anywhere anytime soon. And so even into Monday afternoon, Monday night, it's still the dominant mechanism here of steer. And we've also got a little ridge developing right up through southeastern Queensland at the same time. There's this little area here of very weak upper level winds, indicative of a fairly weak ridge developing. And so with that ridge developing, it also creates a block. Remember, I've been talking now for a couple of days to you about the block that's going to stop this system moving southwards. Now, the block is going to be there. It's just a matter of how large this system's going to get as to how it interacts with that blocking mechanism. Now, you can see the block continues to remain in here through the southeastern parts of Queensland. This upper level ridge in through inland parts of Australia starts to weaken from around about Tuesday and starts to push a little bit further to the west. Now, the system is expected to make landfall on Tuesday, as you know, from all the different computer models, and you've got a variable area of landfall, anywhere from Cardwell all the way down to Mackay at this stage, with the most likely scenario, a landfall being Ingham through to about Bowen, or I'd even put it as far south as Proserpine, but at this stage, Ingham to Bowen would cover most, at least about 75% of the ensemble. Now let's look further ahead and see what these upper levels of the atmosphere are going to do to us. Now what we're going to see here is a trough lifting up through central Australia. The ridge weakens and moves westwards. So as this system pushes further to the west, we'll have a ridge in the Coral Sea, we'll have a trough in inland parts of Australia, and the combination of these factors is going to stall the system over inland Queensland, and then that upper level trough amplifies and captures the system. So here's our upper level trough. And now our system is no longer free to continue moving westwards and will eventually adopt a south to southeast direction and get gobbled up by the upper level trough here coming through southeastern Australia. And so you can see the system remains fairly slow moving, fairly weak now across northern inland Queensland into next weekend. Now there is variations to that, of course. Some of the modelling pulls it southeastward, some of the models just keep it there until it dies, which makes significant differences in rainfall potential later on. But in general, folks, that's what's steering this system, so you've got a fairly good idea now at why the system's doing what it's doing. So you can see this is definitely a serious system, folks, definitely one to take serious, and it's still the opportunity for it to move as far north as Cardwell on the ensemble members, as far south as Mackay on the ensemble members, but the area that we're still looking at the system making landfall in is that Ingham to Bowen region. So, keep your eyes on your weather centre tonight out here to the southeast of Willis Island, and let's watch for deep convection that's blooming right over the top of the circulation centre, and especially what we're looking for here are these little areas of black or even white in the thunderstorm activity. So you can see here just these little spots of white. If we start to get those little spots of white turning into spots of black, ooh, watch out. That's definitely something we need to watch out for. And certainly if we start to see some lightning in the central core area, that's definitely another sign of rapid intensification. Got some pretty big tides, folks, about 3.5 meters over the next few days into Monday, Tuesday, getting up to 3.65 in Townsville and 3.5 as well. Let's look at Mackay. Mackay here, we're looking at 5.5 up to about 5.7 and getting up to almost 6 meter tides. In fact, I think we do nudge 6 meters in one of these tides through Tuesday. So the expectation here is that if we get the system crossing at the wrong time, there could be a very destructive storm surge with this tropical cyclone. Now, when we're talking storm surges with tropical cyclones, We're generally talking about areas that are south of the circulation, because generally we need this water to be piling up and the wind to be creating that piling up effect of the water onto the land. Now that's not going to happen if you're going to have winds coming off the land into the water, but it will happen if you've got winds coming from the water onto the land. So the expectation here is that we could see a very destructive storm tide or storm surge as this system makes landfall, if it makes landfall at the wrong time. You can see here that places to the north of Townsville, just in this scenario, hypothetically speaking, we're not saying it's going to hit Townsville. Please don't make that mistake by thinking that that's exactly what we're saying. But in this scenario, let's pretend the system's hitting Townsville, okay, and we can see here to the north, there's not going to be any sign of any storm surge because we're getting westerly winds coming off the land. So no storm surge here, big, massive storm surge in through this section of coastline here where the wind is getting to pile this water right up into this area. And the worst storm surge will happen where the wind is able to funnel the water into a bay. So notice here how this air is coming in from the north, and it'll be able to funnel all of that water into this little area of land. And that's what we're looking for a destructive storm surge. You can see to a certain extent the coastline around Townsville has that little bay type of structure. So you can see after the system makes landfall, once you get those northerly winds, that's when you get that destructive storm surge around Townsville. We saw it with Yassi. There wasn't much of a storm surge before Yassi hit, and once Yassi hit, the strand was just completely underwater. So that's the sort of stuff we're talking about, folks. Very heavily dependent, of course, on where the system goes. Because, I mean, look at the GFS, for example. You can see that the system never actually gets anywhere near Townsville. So there's no storm surge here whatsoever. And then, bang, down here around Mackay is getting absolutely nailed with a big storm surge. So too this area in and around the Whitsunday Islands. So these are certainly elements that we'll need to pay more attention to as we get closer to landfall of the system, because a Category 4 system is going to create a very damaging and destructive storm surge to its south, and to a lesser extent could create a damaging storm surge once the system moves inland and you get northerly winds on the central and north Queensland coastlines. Looking at Queensland rainfall today, you can see Tropical Cyclone Debbie creating most of that rainfall out offshore. Now let's take a look at tomorrow. You can see some of that rain is just starting to nudge that central coast. Now remember, central coast is under cyclone warning. The North Tropical Coast isn't. And you can see here that the onshore winds are what's creating the shower activity to the south of the system. Here around Townsville, Ingham, Tully, Innisfail, Cairns, you're getting southerlies or even southwesterly winds, which are bringing in dry air. Here in Mackay, you're getting southeasterly winds, which are bringing in moisture from the tropical cyclone. As we go into Monday, of course, the cyclone starts to move towards the coast and probably starts to accelerate a little bit towards the coast. You can now start to see moderate to heavy falls along and south of the track of the system. Further to the north, though, you can see dry southwesterly winds continue to circulate further north of the forecast track. Now, as we go to Tuesday, there's a fair bit of disagreement in the track forecast, of course, anywhere from, as I say, Cardwell down to Mackay, but in general most of the models are agreeing on this coastal crossing around Townsville to Bowen, or Ingham to Bowen would be a little bit more accurate. And so therefore the strongest rainfall potential just to the south of where the system crosses. And so you can see this area around Alva Beach, Ayr, Guthalungra, Bowen, and moving inland a little bit too with that track as well. So you can see some very heavy falls here, 300 to 400 millimeters, quite possible. The cyclone isn't going to be moving as quickly as we were seeing on models a couple of days ago, and that's why it keeps getting delayed and delayed and delayed in terms of its actual hitting of the coast, the time frame of landfall. And initially we were talking even Sunday night, Monday morning, which obviously is not going to happen now. But the delay of this system is also a good thing because it'll bring in a lot more rain for isolated pockets of this coastline. As we go to Wednesday, you can see the system moves further inland, and you can see some very heavy falls around Charters Towers, Hewenden, getting down in towards the northern parts of the Central Highlands coalfields. Still some very heavy falls on the North Queensland and the Central Queensland coastline. Still looking at some fairly dry westerly winds coming through the Cairns, Innisfail area, Cooktown area. So looking fairly dry up through the peninsula and up through the North Tropical Coast region. And further south, though, as the system moves onshore, you can see northeasterly winds now coming onto the coast. A big increase in rainfall across central and southeastern Queensland as well. So very interesting stuff, isn't it, how it all works? Looks like she's going to be a doozy of a system, folks, so we've waited a long time, and we're certainly going to see something nice produced. We're going to issue these updates 2, 3, 4 times a day now until the system hits land, but subscribers get them 2, 3, 4 times a day. We'll issue one to the general public every evening. AusCycloneChasers.com.au, click on subscribe. Also, folks, if you are in the general public and you want to know what we're doing chase-wise, we will be documenting this system, no doubt about it. Click on the chase page, and the chase page will give you some weather station data, maximum and minimums. But obviously, if you want to actually see the real data, the stuff that's happening every minute, go into the current chase page once you're a subscriber, and you'll have access to automatically uploading data every minute, looking at temperature, dew point, humidity, 1 second maximum winds, 3 second maximum winds, and which direction those winds are coming from. We're currently testing it at the moment. It's going beautifully, and we can't wait to field test it in the middle of a Cat 4. Ooh, maybe even a Cat 5, but at least the middle of a Cat 4 would be amazing to see the data that we'll collect out of it. So help support our work, AusCycloneChasers.com.au, click on subscribe, and you won't be disappointed you did. On top of that, we'll have some live streaming cameras as we're in the cyclone. They'll be on the subscriber page, but we'll also have a live streaming Facebook camera for you. Won't be as action-packed as the one that we'll do for subscribers, but you'll still see what's going on outside there. Obviously, 3G, 4G coverage dependent. And of course, our Facebook page, folks. That's where you need to be for all the latest updates on this system. We include very relevant local information, things like storm surge maps, so you know if you're in the surge areas, talking about all the different interesting elements of this system on our Facebook page. Plus, remember, once we're out there in the elements, you'll be seeing some live stream. As I say, won't be quite the dynamic live stream that the subscribers will get, but you'll certainly get a feel of what's going on in the cyclone using our live stream as well. AusCycloneChasers.com.au and Facebook.com/AusCycloneChasers.